Let's look at the United States around the end of the 1800s. The titans of the industrial age, known as the robber barons, spent enormous amounts of money on luxury never seen before. Their summer homes in the Berkshire Mountains of western Massachusetts still stand as testimony to their enormous wealth. Railroads were the way to get from the heat and humidity of the East Coast to the mountains, and we found a living history museum that still runs along that rail route.
It's easy to see why the families of the industrialist robber barons escaped New York City to summer in the rural beauty and quaint charm of the Berkshire Hills of western Massachusetts. It's here that the Westinghouse, Morgan, Vanderbilt, and other celebrity families built their summer mansions. Referred to as cottages, they typically had a minimum of 20 rooms on at least 30 acres of land. What better way to imagine this era than to travel on the same tracks that brought these families to the Berkshires between the 1850s and 1900s. This experience is all made possible by the volunteers of the Berkshire Scenic Railway.
The Berkshire Scenic Railway Museum is an all-volunteer, not-for-profit museum founded in 1984. We're a very unique operation because we're a living history museum. We actually travel on the tracks that we have adjacent to our museum, and we share that line with an active freight line, the Housatonic Railroad.
This unique partnership allows passengers to travel back in time and experience the excitement of rail travel in restored passenger cars.
All aboard!
The passenger coaches that we use are actually Pullman built back in the 1920s. They were utilized on the Lackawanna Railroad and then the Erie-Lackawanna Railroad, and were actually used as commuter coaches in the New Jersey Transit. They are very original. They have had very little work done to them over the years, and they're very well preserved. They're fairly large capacity. They have 70 seats per coach. They're 70 feet long, and they weigh 54 tons apiece.
Passengers riding in the coaches are greeted by a volunteer train conductor who punches their tickets with a vintage ticket punch.
The ticket punch is just as important to a passenger train crew member as much as a lantern is to a freight crew brakeman. The ticket punch is used primarily for canceling passenger tickets so they can't be used again on another revenue run. Each conductor or assistant conductor or trainman will have their own individual punch, and that's used for accounting purposes. If a passenger complained about the way their ticket was or saying that their ticket wasn't punched, the railroad could go back, look at the individual punch that was made, and identify the actual crew member, train crew member, who punched that ticket.
Once the train gets underway, there are plenty of sights to take in.
Someone riding our train would see a number of different industries, some that are still active and others that are not. They will see 3 historic stations, which is fairly unique because a lot of museums don't have the access to historic stations that our museum does. We have our museum here at Lenox Station, which was built in 1903. The original station had burnt down. We also have the Lee Station, which is now a restaurant. That is also an original historic station. And at the end of our route, we have Stockbridge Station, which our passengers also have the ability to walk around and explore, much like Lenox Station. As you travel along, you'll see October Mountain State Forest, which is very scenic. It's a very beautiful area. You get to see a lot of open fields, some private residences. It's very unique because you see a combination of industry, nature, residential areas, downtown areas, and it's a bit of a mix. You get to see a little bit of everything.
The steam locomotives that brought the barons to the Berkshires were retired long ago. The engines used today are vintage diesel-electric locomotives from the late 40s and early 50s.
The Berkshire Scenic Railway has several switcher-type locomotives. The locomotive behind me is a 1953 switcher, SW8, built by General Motors. The other engine is the 9128, an SW9, very similar, built in the, again in the early 50s for the Pennsylvania Railroad. We also have a small industrial switcher that's mainly just on display in the yard. And we also have a product built by American Locomotive Company that was built in Schenectady, New York, an S1 type switcher, built in 1945.
Volunteers run all the locomotives. It's this volunteer effort that makes it possible for this important railroad history to be preserved.
What's important about railroading and preserving railroad history is that railroading is really and truly the fabric of American history. It helped the expansion of the West. It brought a lot of industry into various areas that otherwise may not have had it. And in particular, in the Berkshires, what's very interesting about railroading history is that it brought tourism to the Berkshires because you had the wealthy individuals from the New York area who decided to build their cottages here. Because of those cottages, the tourism industry in the Berkshires was born.
So take the time to not only relive the gilded age of the past, but experience a bit of living history today on the Berkshire Scenic Railway.